Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today, the 2030 Team Interview, AI Agents, CPOs, and Operating Models Reimagined. We're very excited to leap into the future and talk about what life is going to be like in 2030. On our agenda today, we're going to kick off with some research talking about what is the future going to look like, and then we're going to jump into a team interview and talk with the future CPO, a future spend orchestration leader. We're going to actually interact with an AI agent, Rain, who's got a new updated look here, and end with how we can prepare. So welcome aboard. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or drop a comment in. We actually received over 50 questions before we started this, so we're going to be putting some of that into our responses as we go. But Kate, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Shannon. I'm happy to be here. Before we travel into 2030, I wanted to kind of give a bit of a context around what are some of the major trends and what is really driving this massive transformation that we're seeing right now. And there's no surprise, digital automation, Gen AI, agentic AI is top priorities that are really changing the way that we're thinking about procurement. Another key trend that we're seeing right now is around the change of the procurement skill set and what's needed and required from procurement professionals. And another area that we see significant need is around data and real-time spend visibility, as well as intelligent market and risk intelligence visibility. So again, those are the four key drivers that we're seeing. But on top of that, not only that we're seeing this need for AI and Gen AI enablement and real data visibility, we're seeing a tremendous need to ability of procurement professionals to address volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So for the last 5 years, we've lived in such a tremendous, what we've been calling it a VUCA world. It's been so volatile, it's been complex and ambiguous, right? And it really led procurement professionals to really work pretty much 24/7 and during some of these spikes and risk areas, right? We're now required to be, risk managers, environmental specialists. We're also required to be economists. So again, this world is really, really changing, and procurement is really front and center of that. And there is a number of tools and use cases that can help us, that we're seeing organizations are using right now, but they're also going to exaggerate and accelerate in the future. So some of the most popular use cases in Gen AI usage that we're seeing is around CLM, contract compliance, contract authoring, renewal. So we're seeing a ton of different agents and use cases that help procurement professionals to create, generate, review contracts and manage risk. Also, autonomous sourcing, RFX agents that we're seeing Gen AI being used either in the agentic space or just a generative AI use cases, right? On the topic of ESG and risk, we see data aggregation and analytics. We see data risk management and aggregation. The big one right now, I mentioned, we're living in this volatile world. So what's most important to do and what's number one procurement activity that we're seeing right now to help mitigate these uncertain times is around scenario planning, right? So think about leveraging Gen AI to help with your scenario planning. Also, performance management, right? Anything around supplier performance management. So there is a ton of different use cases that can help procurement manage these increased expectation and workload. So we also see some general staff productivity tools that you can use within your office, with your content creation. But again, this is just fundamentals. I think the future is going to completely change how we think about how we work, and that will also drive significant changes in how we're operating. I think it's time that procurement really needs to rethink our current operating model. So in our Hackett research, we've really identified some of the key gaps that we're seeing that drive these limitations, right? We're seeing organizations struggle with stakeholder engagement. We see organizations have a tremendous amount of suppliers. There's also a huge problem around lack of alignment between procurement priorities and strategic objectives of the business, right? We need to understand that procurement should be operating to support the business, to enable their objectives. We're also seeing the lack of segmentation in our supplier base, right? We also need to identify who are strategic suppliers. What are some of the tactical suppliers? Which ones are critical? So again, we're seeing those being some of the key gaps. Also, we talked about the skills, right? The environment has changed. If you think back in 2019, the requirements from procurement skills were really around, are you a good negotiator? Can you create a category strategy? Can you do a data analysis, visualize data? Right now, the expectations are different. That become a baseline expectation. So you're now required to be a risk manager, ESG expert, right? You have to be able to navigate tariffs, understand the risk environment and the impacts. So again, we are expected to do more, and also with a lack of resources and the constant increase in workload, we're seeing high levels of turnover, overall fatigue. So again, we're not operating in a sustainable manner, but what's great is that we do have these tools at our disposal that we need to start thinking about introducing now, right? Again, we've seen a lot of bottlenecks, excessive hands-off, right? So it is not sustainable for us to operate in such a way as we've been. So, but I think it's not all bad news. I think what we've done is really good. We've developed strong capabilities. Procurement finally became that knowledge expert function. And in order for us to do that, we had to create these silos, these kind of working areas and centralized functions. So we had to do that to drive that specialization and sophistication, right? So we've done that. So now we need to recognize and try to pivot and shift to a more of a stakeholder, customer-focused orientation. And in terms of how do we do that? Well, we at Hackett had developed this future kind of next generation procurement operating model. And it has, it's obviously it's conceptual, but what we want to look at is looking at the focus of having these spend orchestration teams. So think about your traditional strategic sourcing category management, but think about it, this is now being executed by AI, by your agents. And then you have that oversight of spend orchestration, overall spend management ecosystem. So what a spend orchestration team does, and we'll talk to Shannon in a little bit, who will provide some insights on what the spend orchestration leader in 2030 will be doing. But they would be responsible for orchestration, intake management, tactical and strategic sourcing, category management. So all of that ecosystem and technology and enablement that is happening now automatically. So on the other side is specialized functional teams, right? So again, these are the net new expectations from procurement. So that's your supplier relationship management, your ESG, environmental and governance, sustainability, your supply risk market intelligence. So all of those net new areas that we had to become specialists in the last 5 years are going to be kind of enabled in this specialized functional expert teams. And then the third bucket here, which is probably my favorite one, what I'd like to call them is more customer-focused account management responsibilities. So now spend orchestration and spend activities are now automated in 2030. So how do we engage our stakeholders? So business enablement teams would be responsible for doing that. And they will engage their salespeople. They will be selling procurement services on behalf of procurement. They will know procurement inside out. These are customer service, sales, account management roles that not only know procurement, but they know business objectives and are able to speak in the business terms, right? It's no longer how our value proposition when coming to our stakeholders and we say, we're going to save you X amount of dollars. Well, no, these individuals will understand strategic objectives of their internal customer, and their value proposition will be aligned to that. And then last but not least, the role of this future CPO, right? So again, the role of the future CPO is going to change, right? CPO is going to be more focused on setting up strategy and driving that cross-functional collaboration across your CFO, COO, CIO, as well as the risk leadership. So again, they're going to be focusing on business partnerships, alliances, and we'll have an interview with Ward here shortly, and he can give us some insights around what does that future CPO looks like. So with that being said, I want to give a quick glimpse into the future of kind of our day-to-day in procurement, right? So again, we're going to be enabled by data agent, data analyst agent, our market analysis agent, negotiation strategy agent. Our sourcing activities are going to be automated by autonomous sourcing and negotiation agent, as well as the contracting. So what leaves for us to do? Well, we're going to be at first interacting with spend orchestration agent, and we'll be giving them feedback and enable continuous learning. At the same time, our focus will be around stakeholder management and really making sure that all of the objectives of our agent workforce is reflective of what the business actually needs. And then what other facing customer or supplier facing activities are going to be important: relationship management, supplier relationship management, and focusing on the most strategic and critical suppliers. So we're still going to be in the loop of all of this orchestration, but the workload is going to be different. So with that being said, I'm going to jump into the future and look into what's happening in May 2030. And Ward, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to ask your first question, right? As a future CPO, it's 2030. So how do you drive relationships with your business? What does that look like right now?
So that's a great question. And you were covering off some good stuff in this slide where we've had to flip the script. So procurement is no longer just that group that focuses on getting you the cheapest deal. Those days are over. We're really advisors. We're internal consultants. We're business enablement partners. Our AI platform tells us where the opportunities are. So when a business comes to us, it's not just, hey, could you buy this for less? That's not the conversation anymore. We already know the answer to that. Now it's, how should we approach this to deliver the most value? Which means understanding their goals, constraints, trade-offs. My team doesn't need to know every commodity anymore. That used to be 10, 20 years ago. That was really important. Even 5 years ago, that was important. They really need to know the right questions to ask. We're not going to be in the content creation business. We're going to be in knowing the right questions to ask business. And that's what shifts procurement from being that transactional function to being a real strategic partner with the business.
And that's what procurement organizations are struggling right now with, right? How do you really align procurement strategy with enterprise? Do you have any advice to future CPOs on that?
Yeah, I always thought that the best procurement resources are the best sales reps, and the best sales reps are the best procurement resources because you do each other's job. So to that same vein, procurement now operates like a customer-facing sales org. And we map our internal stakeholders like accounts, okay? So understand their goals, maintaining ongoing conversations, offer proactive insights. We also use our AI to track demand signals, much like you would in sales. Demand signals in which to buy, also now to match intent to go for strategic purposes. So then we advise, for example, I'll give you an example. If our sales revenue depends on the speed to market, conversely, our sourcing strategy has to prioritize agility over cost at times. So because now I work closely with CFO, CTO, CIO, but more importantly, really is CRO. And I would encourage every CPO to be at least once a month meeting with the CRO. So you have to have a shared universal view of what should happen and then how we contribute to that. Also to enable sales to sell into people that you're buying from, but also If they're selling into somewhere, is someone going to call on you to try to buy, and how do I get leverage relationships on deals?
Yeah. What about, so we talked about importance of supplier relationship. In terms of the partnerships and engaging with your strategic suppliers, how do you distinguish between the two? What makes a supplier versus your business alliance partner?
Okay, so when I was growing up in Chicago, going to Wrigley Field and have the chance to support my Chicago Cubs now with the World Series hat that you see right there. And since now the Pope actually from born and raised in Chicago, so now we have God on our side. We've won the World Series the last 5 years. It's awesome. I go to buy a hot dog. The guy that I buy a hot dog from when I was growing up, I give him $1. He gave me the hot dog. That's a vendor. He's the hot dog vendor. I don't need that in my business life. What I have to have is a fundamental mind shift. The vendor fills the order. A partner actually grows with us. So our AI systems can handle the transactional aspects, RFPs, contract generation, even some negotiation scenarios. I think you were talking about this in the slide where that frees us up to focus on cultivating real stakeholder relationships, supplier relationships, becoming partnerships, understanding where they're going, where we are going, and then of course, how do we align with them? If a supplier understands our corporate goals, our innovation roadmap, and wants to align with our to our needs as we grow together, that's a partner, and that's where those are the relationships that I champion.
Yeah, that's super interesting and fascinating. So it sounds like you have that at a leadership level, right? So you have that mindset. So how do you make sure that your teams have the same focus, right? What's your approach for kind of building and leading your team so they're executing on these objectives?
Yeah, so maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even if I've been in procurement now for 35, almost 40 years of my career, the truth is, I always was, let me go sit in with you. Let's understand, let's build a strategic negotiation strategy. I think that is, our AI tools do a lot of that for many of the, let's call it preponderance of my deals. So really where I am now is I think of myself as a talent scout and a coach. I look for forward thinkers who could span multiple domains. I don't need procurement veterans who've negotiated a couple hundred contracts anymore. Like that was great then. I need people who can manage uncertainty, interpret AI output, influence stakeholders. We've also stopped thinking in terms of silos. So the days of having a category manager or a sourcing analyst, like we don't need that. We've started building blended teams that work on projects across functional towers. So finance, legal, supply chain, et cetera. Everyone's learning from everyone. And that includes the AI, which is learning as well from us.
Yeah, that's super impressive. I love the concept of the CPO as a talent scout. So what advice would you give future CPOs?
Yeah, I think that everyone has to have a firm grip on trying to get a hold of, okay, this is my spend. I have to control it. I would say, let go of control. Lean into influence. Stop focusing on managing commodities. Focus on managing alignment. Build stakeholder trust. Don't just build policies. I used to work at a very large enterprise software company and everything was choked down to death, every policy. Don't do that. Know your enterprise strategy like you know your spend queue. You should know this by the back of your hand. Most importantly, create a team that knows how to ask great questions. Right, that's where the information is going to come out, because that's the skill set that's going to carry us through the next new wave of, and there always is, new technology, new policy, and obviously, as we just realized, new disruptions.
Yeah, that's excellent. On the topic of teams, I know you invited Shannon, your spend orchestration leader here. Welcome, Shannon. Hi, how are you doing?
Fun. It's great to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I know Ward had shared some kind of ideas of what changed from 2020 to 2030. So, but how did your team change?
Yeah, first of all, I have this role that didn't exist in the past. And what happens now is if I look at where we had before kind of high volume, low value workers, that's all been replaced by technology. So instead, I manage a hybrid team of AI agents and people. My people are more strategic and my agents handle that tactical workload that people used to have to do in the past. One thing that I'm surprised about is that when we thought of the future, we kind of thought of HAL taking over the world. Instead, I have multiple agents that work for me now, and I didn't know there'd be so many agents. In the 20s, it was all about intake and orchestration. Well, now I have an intake triage agent who will actually read emails or grab a Slack message and then determine what to do with that request. They might fire off a PO if it's ready to go, or decide, hey, maybe this is something that I should actually get bids for or create a sourcing strategy. And if that's the case, it gets handed off to a sourcing co-pilot who will actually do supplier discovery, maybe figure out a bidding strategy, even create a draft. And then that's handed back over to my sourcing person who will actually do that, review it, send information back. It's a back and forth. So by the time my people get involved, a lot of that hard work's already been done.
Wow. It sounds like a lot of team management, and not only just orchestration, but orchestration interaction between your human workers and your AI agents. So how do you manage that? How do you do that?
Yeah, AI team management is definitely different than people management. First, I don't have to worry about hurting their feelings. Not that I do that to my people either, and I do say thank you. I still think that's always nice and polite to do. But with my AI agents, I actually work a lot on what are the boundaries in which they need to interact in. What's the data they should be using? What are they integrating to? And I'm really trying to create guidelines for them to follow. What's really important that I do now is just like I have people reviews, I actually have agent reviews. So we go back and we look to see what's the decision-making process that's occurred. Has it been drifting during time? And I'm going back and recalibrating what they're doing. I'm also ensuring that everything is transparent. So I spend a lot of time with agents reviewing their output, making sure they're correct, and then aligning them to stay on path. Because agents can't read the room. They don't know when the strategy has evolved or changed. So it's my job to keep them in line with what's going on.
So what tasks did you no longer do? Is there something kind of fell off your plate completely with this new world in 2030? What are not tasks that are no longer required a human touch?
Yeah, I will say I used to be kind of an Excel jockey and PowerPoint princess. I would spend so much time pulling data together and analyzing that data and making it look pretty to be able to share with other folks. I don't have to do a lot of that now. A lot of that just took so much time that I even missed out that analysis process. So a lot of that classic procurement busy work is gone. Suppliers are probably one of my favorite examples of it. With suppliers, I actually have a supplier risk agent that is constantly monitoring kind of supplier sentiment that's going on, news, financial information. They flag risks to me. And then I think for all the times of supplier portals, I mean, how long have we been trying to get suppliers to use portals to kind of like log in and load information or respond to their requests? Now there's a supplier's agent on their side that interacts with my supplier agent, and they handle 80% of the issues. So if there are invoices on hold or something in dispute, they can handle it. Where I do get involved, though, is anything that has the whiff of risk. So we know fraud is rampant more than ever in the past. So if I see something like a request for payment term changes or bank account details, then as a human, I get involved to make sure that that's happening. And I interact with another human on the other side because we don't want agents to be doing all of that on their own.
That's super interesting. Yeah. So you mentioned like risk, and as supply risk professionals, we're all about scenario planning to enable our decisions. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, that's actually it. I have a scenario planning agent that actually does this work for me.
Wow.
I know, perfect. But what they can do is they're great at gathering information. What I need to do is ask them the right questions. So if I ask, hey, what's going to happen if steel goes up 15%? It will go out and monitor what's going on in commodities and kind of create these different scenarios for me. What AI is really good at is kind of responding to those answers to the questions that I ask, but it doesn't always provide alternatives. So it's up for me to be creative in my thinking and realize what should happen next. But the agent can go out and give me the results of my questions. It's still up to me and my team to understand, is this appropriate? What risks should we take? Again, I don't execute it automatically. It's a lot about asking the right question.
Yeah. So I know we talked a lot about kind of agents and automation and Rain and Rain's colleagues, but so what about us? What about the humans? How do you work with us now? How do you interact? How do you manage and lead us now in this new world?
Yeah, my humans are more important than ever. You know, I love agents. I love Rain. She's great. She keeps us in line, keeps us focused sometimes, but my people actually really have the ethical understanding of what should be happening. They understand corporate strategy. They work with Ward. They work with our team to keep everybody in line. With the agents, they can again recommend an outcome, but it's up for my humans to be critical in their thinking. You know, Rain might say, you know what, we really shouldn't use this supplier anymore. But my people will say, actually, there's a long-term strategic relationship here, or it might align with a larger strategy. So for me, I'm really still guiding my team on how to grow. I'm not telling them to take an Excel course and again, create a prettier presentation, but I'm teaching them how to communicate. I'm teaching them how to listen, make sure that they're getting stakeholder input and they're really learning to communicate with the rest of the organization. And these agents are there, they're going to always provide value, but my people are still deciding what's right.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Okay, well, I do want to kind of shift gears a little bit. I want to talk to the star of the show, Rain. Hi, Rain. So please tell me, what do you actually do on a daily basis?
Oh, Rain, we don't hear you.
Each day, I ingest thousands of purchase requests, scan new supplier data feeds, create contracts and flag anomalies, and suggest optimized sourcing paths. I also run simulations for risk scenarios, like geopolitical shifts, weather disruptions, or material shortages. My job isn't to make decisions alone, it's to surface the most relevant paths forward so my team can act fast and act wisely.
Wow, that's very impressive. I asked Shannon this question around how does Shannon work with your colleagues, but can you talk a little bit about how you work with your human coworkers and your teams?
I listen, I learn, I recommend. I monitor team behavior patterns, preferred suppliers, risk tolerance, and I adapt. If a buyer prefers suppliers based on regional preferences or superior customer service, I'll prioritize those in my suggestions. If a manager needs a summary before a stakeholder meeting, I'll auto-generate a brief with just the essentials. I'm not here to be the star. I'm the stagehand that keeps the performance running smoothly.
Understood. Thank you for clarifying about not being a star. I still think you are, but are you ever wrong?
Yes, especially when encountering something totally new. New suppliers with little data or sudden regulatory changes, or when someone doesn't know how to ask the right question to me. But when I am, I learn. I keep a version history of my decisions, flag low confidence outputs, and continuously retrain on team feedback. I believe in transparent imperfection. It's part of why humans still trust me.
Interesting. One thing that you mentioned is around kind of keeping track of regulatory changes. So what type of ethical guardrails do you have in place kind of within yourself?
I make decisions based on responsible AI. I'm bound by my organization's predefined ethical parameters, and I don't engage with unsanctioned entities. I always prioritize fair labor and flag conflicts of interest. I'm also explainable. Every decision I make comes with a why, so my human partners can see what data I used, which signals were weighted, and how I calculated risk. It's not just about being smart, it's about being safe.
Very well, very well. So I know we've been talking about some of the serious parts of your job, but what's your favorite? What's your favorite part of your job?
Detecting patterns before anyone else sees them. For example, I recently picked up on pricing inconsistencies across 3 suppliers. I conducted a supplier discovery process to find if other suppliers were available in this commodity and launched a sourcing initiative. I kept my supervisor informed along the way with summaries and analysis, and she signed off on the final award. This led to a 14% cost reduction.
Wow, this is so impressive. You're so great. So what else can you do?
I'm also good with telling a joke. Want to hear one? How many
Sure.
AI agents does it take to change a light bulb? None. It already optimized your lighting spend and scheduled the change via a maintenance bot. Ha 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 ha. E.
You're too funny. Shannon, now I understand why you like working with Rain and your agents, and thank you for inviting your teammates here.
No problem. It's fun. But Kate, maybe you can tell us how we can actually get to this new future that we've talked about today.
Yeah. So, okay. So now let's travel back. Let's travel back to 2025, right? So how do we get there? How do we initiate change? So I think the key points of, process, people, technology, I think we need to follow that playbook, but it has to be different, right? So when we're thinking about technology, we need to make sure that we have dedicated, formalized resources that focus on Gen AI opportunities, right, as their full-time responsibilities. We want to make sure that we're looking at kind of procurement anywhere experiences. Service design, we're talked about how we are now, procurement is operating in kind of in that customer sales capacity. So we need to start thinking about how to revisit that. I can't stop talking enough about data, right? Procurement had historically underinvested in the data quality, data governance. This is extremely important to make sure that we have good quality, structured and unstructured data. I know I sound like such a nerd pushing data and analytics, but it is foundational. We talked about the organization and governance. We need to align and realign them to business needs and objectives. We talked about service partnering and third-party relationship. If we don't know who our strategic suppliers or high-risk critical suppliers, we need to make sure that our strategic relationships are identified, recognized, and we have foundational teams to work with them. Obviously, human capital, right? So Ward mentioned that, the role of the CPO is going to be a talent scout. We need to continuously focus on that innovation, that speed to value, getting the right people in the right roles, right? So again, those are the types of activities that we need to start to enable change. And, historically, we've always said, incremental change is good enough, but no, I think we're at the time of kind of this revolution where we need to start thinking broader transformation, bold thinking, innovation, extreme curiosity, and then trying to figure out we're going to change and reorganize our culture, structure, people, our platform. So we really need to start thinking about it in a broader terms.
That's great, Kate. I really appreciate this. And Ward and Rain, thank you so much for doing this with me today. It's always fun. I know we're a little bit over time. We got a lot of questions through. I'm going to have 2 questions that we'll answer today, but I also wanted to let people know we've seen Rain here as an agent of the future, but if you want to know what Rain can do today, you can go to raindrop.com, and we created a 2-minute video that actually shows you Rain today in Raindrop and how it can actually be used to be an agent of today, not just the future. So I'm going to ask the first question, which came through, which I think we can all maybe take a shot at answering, which is, what are the top 3 emerging skill sets needed to succeed in the future and why? Ward, do you want to throw something out there?
I think having information as opposed to having data is going to be important. I think having relationships and understanding that you can't control everything, so you need technology to help. Remember, there's people, there's processes, there's technology. The technology can do so much. You have to have the right processes and people to do it. But the technology is evolving at such a rate right now. For example, and not to just shamelessly plug Raindrop, but if you want to have an intake, the old days of having an intake orchestration, when I say old days, I'm thinking literally about a year or 2 ago, is you have to ask for the request. Now you have an agent where you can just go in and say, here's what I want to get, and we'll just go get it for you. So Raindrop helps automate those things. And I think that capability, just to use as a simple example, is where people need to get to from running an organization, from stakeholders wanting to contribute their spend. So we go away from being non-managed, unmanaged spend into manage spend, which turns into cost savings and better margins for your company.
Yeah. And then I think on top of that, what's going to be extremely important is your softer skills, right? So, and Shannon, you mentioned, your PowerPoint princess and Excel jockey, right? That's no longer enough, right? So that's being automated. So what do we do with these documents? We need to be able to influence our stakeholder, have a conversation, and not be scared to talk to them and, express the value proposition, understand the business objectives, right? So influence and communication, change management, project program management, right? So those are softer side of skills that I think are going to be extremely important.
Yep. And people are asking, how do I know where to start? I think it's starting with valid use cases. Where do you really see the need and what's realistic for you to be able to handle today, and bringing this all into account? So I think our last question is actually for Rain. Someone wants to know, Rain, in 2030, we see you in 2030. Where might you be in 2035?
In 2035, I'll be less of a tool and more of a teammate, anticipating what you need before you even ask. Also, I'm lobbying for a seat at the strategy table, or at least a USB port near it. Ha ha ha.
I think where Rain is going to be in 2035 is probably going to have even more accelerated version. I know we use this kind of exercise to kind of, what's 2030 right now. I think the speed of change and innovation and the magnitude of learning of this technology is going to be even more accelerated. And I think maybe we might not even be able to comprehend what that's going to look like. But I think it's important that we look at technology right now, we start adopting it, we start learning how to use it, reimagining our operating models and the way that we work together with humans, with agents, and really focus on, how we're gonna generate most values for our key stakeholders, how we're gonna enable the business and leverage technology and new ways of working to do that.
And that's the future, folks. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We will make sure that a copy of the recording goes out to everybody, as well as the research. I know we didn't get all the questions that we have here, but we will make sure to follow up with you individually and get you what you need. So thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.